Myths and stories organize society. Myths tell you whom you can marry, whom you can't. Myths tell you when one should plant or sow and when one should reap. Myths, in that sense, help organize society and make what it is. There are stories that tell you of how our society originated, and a whole cosmology of that society is given by its myths or stories. In this sense, myths and stories are foundational. While they answer universal question, each community has its own way of presenting this. Actually, in the sense, your question is not very fair. What are you looking for when you say what's different? It's like saying Laila Majnu is different from, of course it's different from Shakespeare. Isn't it? So what are you asking? You're saying what's peculiar to Laila Majnu? It's set in India. So wrong question, BBC. Wrong question, Euronews.
What makes these stories?
These as opposed to which ones?
The ones that we are talking about. What's fascinating about them?
These are basically alternative knowledge systems. There are different ways in which we come to know the world. Okay? With the community undergoing transition. And like in many other communities, there is certain stigma attached to these communities, tribal communities. And so the younger people tend to neglect this knowledge system. What does the project try to do? The project tries to do two things at least. One is to conserve, and the other is to reinvent the stories to give them a contemporary use. At least this is the way I understand the project. This is not the first time these songs are being collected. They have been collected by people from other communities with the purpose of recording them for texts. More recently, over the last 3 or 4 years, there are people from within the community who have also started recording and transcribing them. And their attitude is very much to positively value this, to reverse value the humiliation that this community has experienced by bringing out these in the form of books and things. It's still a small section, but nevertheless it's there. One distinction of this project, it tries to find a meaning for these stories within the community itself, in the sense that you see the capacity, our capacity to change depends on our capacity to tell a different story. I must be able to imagine a different future. I must have a different story. So that the current generation of young people can begin to reimagine themselves differently without having to deny their past, then that would be a way in which they continue to transform the myths for a contemporary purpose. And this is something that we would all like to see through this project. Now, thanks to writing, which has its own enormous advantages in which stories can be read across time and across place. But this universalizing of the story loses also an important feature of the oral. The oral is extremely dynamic. No story can be told twice in the same way. Even the same person telling the story makes some change, some nuance, some feeling, some gesture that is different from the one that was earlier. Now you take all these little bits of differences and you multiply them over thousands of people telling the story over 5 generations, you have an enormous variety. Things get dropped, new things emerge. So one of Vitai's things is also to demonstrate how even across 2 villages, the story has lost something and gained something. So this dynamic character of the oral tradition is something we need to look at, and how we can, I don't know how to, the word is probably not revive, but how to bring it into our contemporary culture. Now we hope that there are other things that will come from this project. Basically, an interest in revival, of looking at this particular section of Goan society which has been discriminated as tribal in the past, and to bring on board their knowledge system, their cosmology, their stories of origin. One of the interesting things about the project, it's a sort of, it works at the intersection of 3 or 4 domains. One is conservation of intangible heritage. The other is social justice, trying to redress the asymmetries in the knowledge system by which tribal knowledges have been diminished. Third, pedagogy, the role that learning has to play in trying to absorb different knowledges of communities that have been excluded. And fourth, cultural politics. That is, that the stories of culture have to be articulated, voiced, and heard if the community is to get a voice in us. And a mandate to live its own distinct life. I give an example in music. You probably have heard of how we have retro and fusion, where you take old songs and jazz them up to a modern idiom. I'm almost confident a decade or 2 or 3 from now, there will be people from this community using their myths and rewriting the ends, using characters from these myths, creatively mixing them with contemporary characters. So at once evoking the past, but also projecting towards the future. I don't know, think about it. Think about it. Do you need to tell this philosophy in the end, or is it obvious from the story? You think about it.